Hello, my friends. There will be an inflation relief payment for millions of Americans in September, October, and November. Friends, I know that many of you are also wondering whether you are eligible to receive a fourth stimulus check. So in today's video, I will be sharing with you the new eligibility requirements and how much these checks will be worth. Friends, please make sure that you watch until the end of this video. Remember, the more videos that you watch and then leave a comment on, the greater your chances of winning the giveaways.
$31 trillion in debt. That is intergenerational theft. In fact, Madam Speaker, by the time I'm done speaking tonight, just my part, the federal debt will have grown by more than $13,000. That's right. I suspect I'll take about 3 minutes, maybe 4. But during that time, the federal debt will have grown by $13,000. We learned last week that August's annual inflation rate was a staggering 8.3%. By we, of course, I mean everyone except Joe Biden, who boasted on 60 Minutes last night that inflation has not spiked. If the worst inflation numbers in 40 years isn't a spike, I don't know what is. Unfortunately for Mr. Biden, the numbers don't lie. That 8.3% inflation is costing families well over $4,000 this year alone, essentially wiping out 1 month's paycheck. I don't know a single family that can afford that kind of sacrifice. Worse, real wages have fallen every single month since President Biden's $1.9 trillion stimulus passed last year. But it's not just today's taxpayers that will feel these impacts. Generations from now, people will still be feeling the sting of Biden's inflation crisis. Over the next decade, decisions made in Biden's first 2 years will add $4.8 trillion to our federal deficit. $4.8 trillion. Decades of lower interest rates have spared the federal government from facing the true costs of borrowing at such high levels, but today's inflation has forced the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates. We are quickly approaching a point where the interest alone on our federal debt will overwhelm our federal budget, resulting in dire economic effects. 1%.
Gas prices and inflation as a whole have come down somewhat in recent weeks. However, prices are still much higher than they were a year ago, and that is leaving Americans feeling shortchanged. There are multiple states that are taking matters into their own hands. Each state has its own approach, with some offering tax rebates, while others are simply cutting checks. A handful of states have stimulus relief checks or rebates on the way this coming fall. Rhode Island families seeking financial relief need to make sure that their taxes are filed and that their dependents are claimed to qualify for the state's child tax rebate program. Rhode Island Governor Dan McKee announced that families may receive $250 per child for a maximum of 3 children. Recipients can receive a maximum of $750. The tax rebates come from the governor's fiscal year 2023 budget that was signed in June. A press release from Governor McKee's office states, rebate checks will be automatically issued to all eligible tax filers beginning in October 2022. Those eligible must meet 3 criteria. A person filing must have an income of $100,000 a year or less, and those who are married filing jointly must take in a total income of $200,000 or less. Recipients must also have at least one qualifying dependent, age 18 or younger, as of December 31st, 2021. Also, the dependent must reside in the state of Rhode Island. For those qualified to file an extended deadline of October 17th, the rebate should be dispersed in December. About 115,000 families are expected to receive these rebates. The child tax rebate program is unique compared to other states because there is no application required. Other states, such as Connecticut, have also offered a rebate worth $750 for a 3-child household. For months on end, millions of Americans have been struggling with sky-high living costs. Inflation has made it so difficult that everything from clothing to food to utilities are much more expensive, and households that depleted their savings during the crisis are now being forced to make very difficult choices. Now, earlier on in the crisis, there were several rounds of stimulus checks that were very important for those who were struggling. Roughly 1.75 million New Yorkers can expect a $270 stimulus check sometime before October 31st, as part of Democratic Governor Kathy Hochul's efforts to ease the burden of inflation in the state. The Department of Taxation and Finance said there is no clear timeline for when the checks will begin to go out. All the checks are expected to be delivered on or before October 31st. The stimulus payments are part of a $475 million tax relief program that was unveiled by New York lawmakers on September 8th, seeking to improve affordability for low-income residents. All eligible New Yorkers who receive the Empire State Child Credit or the Earned Income Credit on their 2021 state tax returns will receive their checks by the end of October. Governor Hochul has told reporters this program will put money back in the pockets of nearly 2 million New York families struggling to make ends meet in the face of this crisis, inflation, and other rising costs. The $270 checks are part of the additional New York State child and earned income tax payment that was approved for the state's budget for the 2023 fiscal year. Eligible residents do not need to take any action to receive these checks because it would be sent out by the state automatically. Also, the state of Virginia will begin sending out about 3.2 million tax rebates worth up to $500 this week. There are also around 6.2 million residents in the state of Illinois who will start to receive their income tax rebates worth up to $100, along with a property tax refund worth up to $300. Friends, it's great to see that more financial relief is finally being made available to the American people, especially during this ongoing crisis. Well, my marvelous and magnificent friends, that is the end of my daily stimulus update video for today. The winner of today's Walmart gift card giveaway is Lily Greer. Congratulations, dear friend. To claim your gift card, please check your notifications page and send me an email, or you can also send me a message on my Facebook page. Thank you, friend.
Of higher interest rates would cost the federal government $400 billion every year starting next year. Just 1% rise in the interest rate cost the federal government $400 billion in extra interest. That's on top of what we're paying already. That's money we could spend on national defense, health care, and other of the many priorities our nation faces. But instead, we're paying interest on our debt. Interest payments will pass defense spending by the end of the decade. They'll pass Medicare by 2046 and Social Security by the midpoint of the century. As the Federal Reserve continues to raise interest rates to combat inflation, which will likely happen again this week, this only gets worse. This, again, is intergenerational theft. Every year, we add more than 4 times the entire U.S. population to our national debt. The time to act is now. We're stealing from our children and our grandchildren and deferring a crisis for them to fix. We must act. Each year that goes by without increased deficits digs our hole deeper and deeper. It's time to put down the shovel. One of the first things we learned when I became a member of the Georgia State Legislature was when you're in a hole, quit digging. We're in a hole. We're stealing from our children and our grandchildren and deferring a crisis for them to fix, and we must act. As a medical professional by training, I'm well acquainted with the Hippocratic Oath, which famously says, first, do no harm. Congress must take a similar approach when it comes to our budget. Congress doesn't control interest rates, but we can control how much money is added to our national debt. Responsible fiscal policy that balances our budget is the first step to walking away from the fiscal cliff, over which our children's children are already dangling. President Biden's budget calls for $1 trillion in deficit spending every year going forward. Again, that is money we do not have and cannot continue pretending like we do. Republicans must insist on reining in this spending. That means no more trillion-dollar packages that pour fuel on the fire of inflation. That means eliminating our deficit so we can pay off our outsized debt. That means returning the budget process to regular order. You know, Washington Democrats recently passed the Inflation Reduction Act, or as I like to call it, the Inflation Acceleration Act. Because this bill did not go through regular order, there was a grave oversight that threatens a $5.5 billion electric vehicle plant that is set for construction in my district. It's put it in jeopardy. This highlights just how important it is that bills go through regular order. If we had had a committee markup on this, we could have called it. If we had vetted it. One of my favorite sayings is that none of us is as smart as all of us. That's why all of us should be involved in this. The same logic applies to budgeting. If we don't give our members the ability to read, debate, and amend legislation, we end up with policies and proposals and budgets that hurt the same people that purport to help. When we miss budget deadlines, we are breaking the law. In what world does it make sense for the legislative body to routinely break federal law, the laws we wrote and passed? Small business owners and families have to make a budget, and they have to stick to it. It's time to restore fiscal discipline in Washington, D.C. It's time to balance our budget. Again, I want to thank the gentleman for allowing me this time, and I want to thank him for hosting this. This is important. You know, I don't know what it's going to take to get people's attention, short of a catastrophe. But I do know this: we cannot continue. We cannot continue on the route in which we are right now. This is intergenerational theft. We cannot leave this to our children and our grandchildren.